Welcome to the James Bond Book Club. Hosted by me, John Bleasdale. Hello everybody and welcome to the James Bond Book Club. My name's John Bleasdale and today I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Duncan, who is a writer who has dealt with James Bond most recently through the Taschen books. He just did a wonderful hardback, beautiful coffee table book about Dr. No, the book that we're going to be talking about today. Hi, Paul.
Hi, John. Thanks very much for having me.
First of all, I wanted to ask you first of all, actually, let's talk a little bit about the book you did for Taschen. This is obviously about the film of the book, but yeah, let's just give us a little bit of an introduction to that.
Okay, well, the book is like a day-by-day account of the filming of the movie, right? So, but it's not, that's the majority of it. So it's through words, pictures, documents, everything that's available in the Eon archives, and even stuff that they didn't have, because in the early days, a lot of stuff would go out to archives and photo agencies, never be seen again until the fans picked them up. So, but what I wanted to do with that book is that I wanted to start it with before James Bond, before Dr. No, the first Bond movie. I wanted to learn a bit more of Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. And so I put in a chapter about that. And also I wanted to go back and talk a bit about Ian Fleming and his process and the creation of Bond, including the creation of Dr. No, the novel upon which the film is based. So I did a lot of research, not only at Eon, but I found an original manuscript for Dr. No, and also did research with the Ian Fleming publication. So with some of their material. So I had a good go at it.
That's brilliant. That sounds like you're going to have lots of interesting things for us today. I mean, the film and the book seem to be fixed in my mind and joined in my mind by the fact that the first pan edition of the book that I got my hands on is the film tie-in with Sean Connery and Ursula Andress on the cover. And because obviously it's the first film, you come to the book almost thinking it's the first book if you don't know anything else.
Sure. And I mean, my first experience with Bond was not this. It was a double bill of Thunderball and On Her Majesty's Secret Service that my dad took me to when I was about 12. And then that was like a winter. And then the following summer, I got to see Diamonds Are Forever in Newquay when we were on holiday, and then I saw Dr. No on the following winter for the first. I think it was the first time it was on ITV, and so all my memories are connected to that sort of year of Bond and of getting the DB5, the Aston Martin DB5, which I'd never seen the movie, but I loved the car. And also getting the moon buggy from Diamonds. So I was a great avid car collector of Dinky and Corgi when I was 11 and 12. So that was really my introduction. It was only really later that I started to read them, and I didn't read them in order, like you say. It would just be paperbacks and bits and pieces that I picked up, and I only read them in order when I did the James Bond archives. That was 2010, when I was researching the big archives. And I thought, well, it was about time I read the book in order, and that was the first time I did so. And it's a completely different kettle of fish. It's a completely different attack on the character itself of Bond. When you read the books in order.
It is, isn't it? I mean, that's my revelation, because I'm rereading them. I've read them in order before, and I'm rereading them chronologically. It is kind of almost like you have to, at a certain point, think they're a completely different thing. It's as if you're rewatching the movies, but with a totally different actor. It's not I don't have Sean Connery in my head. I don't have any of those people who've made the movie James Bond so indelible because he lacks some of the core aspects of those. He's not funny, he's not witty. What are some of the differences that you've noticed?
First of all, internal monologue. I mean, the great thing about books is that depending upon the style in which the books are written, um, often you get an internal monologue in a book, which is something that's unique. They've tried to adapt it in a lot of film noirs where they would have the voiceover, but it's not quite the same thing, I think. And I think that this is the revelation or the extra thing that you see. The Bond of the films is a completely different character for me. It's only really showing the surface of the character. What's underneath is shown in the novel.
And those internal monologues reveal someone who is often very scared and often very uncertain of what he's doing. There's you have access suddenly to the insecurities and there's several moments in Doctor No, for instance, where he thinks, I guess I'm going to die now. I think this is it. I think I've come to the end.
Yeah, he's coming to terms with his vulnerability and his inability to really counter Dr. No and his organization and his organizational skills and the psychology that he puts forward. I think that I mean, shall we start going through it because these sort of things become more apparent. The first thing I would say is that it's important to know that the previous book, Bond was almost died, because I think that this is really the turning point in all the books. That the moment of almost dying at the end of From Russia with Love, and then M's uncertainty about Bond's fitness for the job. Really, I think it begins here, begins with this novel, and it's something that lingers and becomes even more apparent as the books go ahead. So I think really this is the beginning of the unraveling of Bond. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how these books are all in sequence, and that's one of the things you notice about reading them in sequence is they very much follow on one from the other, and no more so than this because you've had a real cliffhanger because you think, from Russia with Love, he ends up being poisoned, and the book doesn't tell you if he survives or not. You have him sort of collapsing on the floor, and you have to wait for the next book to come out to find out whether he's dead. It's a little bit of a Reichenbach Falls moment of you can imagine Fleming toying with the idea of not even going back and just having that as the end of Bond.
I don't think you can take that seriously there, John. I think he was definitely going to come back. I mean, he's got a living to make.
It's not soon after Dr. No that he starts to think that and even Dr. No itself, he's sort of the genesis of Dr. No is sort of like as a TV idea. And he's already complaining that he hasn't got enough ideas for James Bond, so he sort of recycles a TV idea in order to use it as a novel. So there is a sense. I don't know if that's just Ian Fleming moaning about stuff, but
Well, all writers moan. Yeah, it's part of the the DNA of a writer, always complaining, because it's this. Writers good writers tend to, with each book, they want to improve in a certain way. One, in order to be entertaining for the reader, but two, also to be more entertaining for the author themselves. So most authors will have a way of working, and they will have a level at which they want to work or attack the work, and so they're always very self-critical. So when I hear comments like that from Fleming, it's not that there's a lack of ideas. It's just that he wants better ideas, and so he has to search a little bit longer, a little bit harder, And so it's a matter
Mm.
of not wasting the ideas. I mean, allied to this, I mean, you're talking about the James Gunn secret agent story from which Doctor emerged. This was one of a series of attempts that Fleming had made in order to try and crack television or film or serialization, another way of getting more income. Because he knew right from the beginning when he started with Bond, novelists writing books don't make money. Novelists serializing the books, novelists turning the books into regular cartoons or into comic strips, comic books, or into TV series or into films on a regular basis. Those are the novelists who can afford to do their job full time, to write full time. And Fleming had always worked for Kemsley, for the Sunday Times newspapers. That was his day job. Writing the novels was his hobby, and he wanted to turn his hobby into a
Mm.
job. So this is why he was constantly trying to turn Bond or a version of Bond into a TV series or film.
So the book starts with this wonderful setup of the murder of Strangways, which a character that we've already met, I think, in Live and Let
That's
Die.
correct. The
If
second novel, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that you get when you read the books is even sort of minor characters will pop up more than once, and we have another one. Quarrel turns up as well um, later on in the book. So you have the murder, which I think is a perfect sort of it's a wonderful opening chapter. It's really evocative of the atmosphere of Jamaica and
Well, it tells you a lot about Jamaica, the area that they're in, Queen's Club, that it's, the rich area of Jamaica. And there's a great a line in it, Richmond Road, which he calls Rich Road, and the Queen's Club. And he says, Fleming writes that one day Queen's Club will have its windows smashed and perhaps be burned to the ground. So he's already adding a bit of the idea of the colonial Jamaica, the fact that this is perhaps not as sedate and as perfect and well run as the people who live there may suppose. So that I thought that was really nice line because it adds, even though there's lots of this great description, adds this little sort of element of danger and foreboding.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a world. This is a world which is in its twilight years. I mean, it's literally twilight as well as being the very first sentence of the book is the sun going down, and then we have the murder, and a very interesting sort of murder too. It has a good elaborateness to it, a mechanical thing going on in terms of how organized it is, and then we go to sort of wintry London, and we have the idea that, yeah, as you were saying earlier on, that Bond is getting over something, and he's not quite trusted to be a fully functional 007, member of the double O. One thing I'm a little bit I always love about the books as well is learning about the double O section and how the Secret Service is organized and how few they are. For some reason, if you watch the films, you get no detail about that. You think there could be, well, I mean, 007, you imagine there are at least 10, say, but there are actually only three at any one time, including 007.
Well,
So
there was the scene in
it's
Thunderball when they go to the meeting and you've got all the double O's in the big. Or am I misremembering that?
from the
Yeah,
film.
from the film.
I wonder. I wonder.
And also in this we get the report of Agent, is it 258 from Washington, going to Jamaica to investigate the disappearance of Strangways and Trueblood. So you see that there are other agents who are also numbered, may not be double O, but are numbered. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But Double O is a very specific, is you're literally the hired assassins of the group. And at any one time, as far as I know from as far as I've got in the reading, there seems to be like only two or three. It's a really limited number, which in a way makes perfect sense. Hopefully they're not murdering so many people that they need fleets of people to be doing it. And the other thing about this chapter is you learn that these early chapters is there's a kind of reinvention of Bond going on. He's having to update his armory because the Beretta you know, those early books are very much overshadowed by the Second World War. There's always this sense that Bond is coming out of the Second World War, and that's where he's won his spurs and what have you. And I think Dr. No, more generally, but certainly at the very beginning, is like he needs a new gun, he needs a shake-up, and even, you get rockets and things in Moonraker and in this one, which takes us away from the Second World War and into the late 50s
Brings
and the
us into the
60s.
jet age. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the change in armories was, as I'm sure you know, was because of a letter from Geoffrey Boothroyd. So May 23rd, 1956, Geoffrey Boothroyd basically writes Fleming and saying, the Beretta's a lady's gun. You know, it's not really
Mm.
suitable for Bond, people of his ilk. And then he says that he really should have a Smith and Wesson 30, and then they go back and forth, Fleming and Boothroyd, and eventually agree to give Bond a Walther PPK as well as the Smith and Wesson. And I mean, I don't mean to spoil it for anybody, the novel, but ironically, for the fame that Bond has for his Walther PPK, he does not fire it in the whole of the novel. He takes the Smith and Wesson with him to the island, and that's the only one that he fires. So
Right.
so it's sort of ironic, I think. And I think this is one of um, the really interesting things about this book is that almost everything that you think about as being about Bond and about the character is womanizing, stuff like this. And the book is almost counter that. It's almost
Mm.
like a riposte to that sort of argument.
Mm.
But but yeah,
Yeah.
so this opening, the second chapter, which is called Choice of Weapon, what I found most interesting was the fact that we're introduced to Sir James Maloney, who basically assesses Bond's fitness to serve. He's an old friend of M's, and what he's basically saying is that the physical fitness, he's healed physically, but is he healed mentally? And that's
Mm.
really the key point, is that does Bond have the capacity, the mental capacity to carry out his and there's a quote that Maloney uses that is, courage is a capital sum reduced by expenditure,
Mm.
which is a great line. It's a great quote. And yeah, and the book is full of these sort of little quotes and asides from other sources. I mean, it's in Fleming showing that he's done his research.
That's great, and that's also sort of one of those ideas that goes contrary to a sort of romantic ideal. You have this idea of somebody who's been through the wars, quite literally in terms of Ian Fleming's generation,
Mhm.
and have built up the calluses and the bravery, and they can face anything. Whereas, in fact, the opposite is true. If you've had extended periods of trauma and nervous tension and exposure to danger, you might be reduced to becoming very vulnerable to loud noises, for instance, and PTSD, as we would call it today. So, that's exactly what he's talking about.
Fleming has basically decided to explore this, and
Mm.
I don't know whether it's based on his own experience or probably more primarily the experience of other agents that he knew. There are people like Ivor Bryce, who's the other guy, Cuneo, who were all friends and close friends and kept in contact. And so it strikes me that maybe Fleming kept in contact with other of his old colleagues, and they would discuss such things. Oh, do you remember so and so? Did you hear what happened to him? Blah blah
Mm.
blah. And so I'm sure stories of this nature are that he cracked, he went to the bottle, or started taking cocaine, or was. I'm sure there was a story, or he went a bit doolally, So I'm sure there's a sort of gossip and a grapevine that Fleming is tapping into here in order to, as well as doing his research.
So, as part of that, in a way, dictates the sort of way the mission is presented as well, because it's not presented as this is going to be a really dangerous mission. It's presented more as this is, kind of halfway house between a holiday. In fact, it's called a holiday task in the third chapter. And the way it's described is this is about birds and an island and a society of birds and this mysterious character, Dr. Julius No, and you have the wonderful line, no as in yes, which they play with. Um, and Fleming himself has this sort of quote where he says, I've always liked no, it's shorter than yes, and you find it commits you. You don't get committed so much. Um, from the racial point of view, which is never far beneath the surface or far into the book when it comes to, we've already had a sort of view of Jamaica in this colonial sense. Now you also have Julius No, who is this half Chinese mixed race character and half German. So well, with the German, they're always we've already had Moonraker and Drax and uh, there's certainly with for Fleming again, there's that shadow of the Second World War where he feels they're not quite to be trusted.
So what Fleming is doing is he's constructing a character who everybody knows exists, but nobody can see him. And he seems to be, he's an intelligent, he's like an uber brain, an omnimind, who seems to be controlling events or changing events or influencing. But we don't know what his real end game is. And I mean, I was reading this and I was thinking, when does he actually tell you what he's up to? And it's like 2/3 of the way through the book. I mean, it's or even the last quarter. Page. I've in my version it runs. What is it? 309 pages, and it's on page 232. So it's 2/3 of the way through, where he actually explains what he's up to, and and it's, if you like, it's the control of information. I remember when I talked with George Lucas, and he was describing about Star Wars, and he was saying that when you have all these concepts and all these characters, and you're trying to put them into order, the hardest thing to do is to put all the information, to feed the information in such a way that people are satisfied, but also intrigued by it, that they want to know more. And that, he said, that was the most difficult thing to do. And I think that one of the great things about this book is exactly that feeding of information, of keeping it going forward, and giving you information which is interesting but maybe not relevant. You don't really know, and it's only as you go through it that you realize that, for example, squids are referred to about 3 or 4 times before one actually appears throughout the book. But the information is put in sideways, hidden among other information. And this is the sort of book that it is. It's very clever.
Seeding ideas and then they come up later on. Even though he sort of does that with some things, and then with other things, as you've mentioned already with the Walther PPK, there's the other side where he seeds something which you think, this will be important in act. This is a Chekhovian gun that we've introduced, and then he doesn't fire it. And I think that he kind of in contradistinction to the films where Q will often say you'll need this towards the end of the film.
That's what essentially Q's there for. It's like the Deus ex machina, the thing, with a single bound he was free. It's that sort of these are the sort of what the gadgets and the devices became in the movies, and this book, as I said earlier, is really contra that. It's basically when Maloney says, he's physically healed, but is he mentally healed? This is exactly what we find out at the end of the book. Because essentially there are certain points where there are references to Bond's body, to his fitness. There's even a scene where Quarrel has to get him fighting fit. It's like the Rocky scene. Um, um, in order for Bond to do the things that he needs to do in order to sail across to Key, and of course that feeds into the final third of the book.
So let's talk about him arriving in Jamaica, and as soon as he arrives, he's immediately being surveyed, and he's immediately in a situation where the instruments of Dr. No, the tentacles, and to use the squid analogy,
Yeah, I was waiting for it.
Are already,
I was waiting,
and sort of begin to reach out.
Yeah, it's Annabelle Chung, we find out later, who's the camera lady who had taken photographs of Bond, who calls him Mr. Bond, and Quarrel arrives, and Quarrel is there to meet him again from Live and Let Die, and you can. It's quite nice, the relationship between the two of them. It's a very open, and Bond is protective of Quarrel. Quarrel is very open but sly and wise in the way that the world works in his part of the world. Very knowledgeable. He has his own tentacle out everywhere. But I think the key point in that chapter is Bond saying that he was making mistakes. He already knows because a Quarrel has turned up in Strangways' car. Yeah. So already 2 and 2 can be put together. Not only do they know that he's arrived, but Quarrel is in Strangways' car. So the purpose of his visit is already known. He's already making mistakes. So this idea of vulnerability, of not being on top of his game, is like there right from as soon as he lands. Which, if you look at the movie, is the opposite. Bond is actually in control in the movie. He's actually quite a force, very confident operator.
I think that's where the Daniel Craig films got it right. I remember someone really criticizing the films for being like, at the beginning he's young and he's just got his thing and he's a little bit rash and brash and all the rest of it, and then within 3 films he's knackered. And and they were kind of claiming that that's way too quick that trajectory happens. But reading the books, Casino Royale and Live and Let Die, and he's making loads of mistakes of inexperience, and he's being followed and saying, "Oh, who would follow me? Nobody knows I'm here," and he just hasn't got a clue. And then by the time you get to Dr. No, he's still making mistakes, but now they're mistakes to do with him being jaded, perhaps, and exhausted, and just, as you say, not at his best. So it kind of, what are we, six adventures in, and he's already, maybe ready for the scrap heap.
And I think also it's almost the equivalent of Fleming's sense of professionalism. The fact that Fleming, he's done 5 novels, he's on his 6th, and he's thinking, well, I've got to up my game. I've got to keep that level up. Yeah, I've got to look forward. I've got to plan ahead as to where Bond will be, or what this character. He's got to live with this character, and it's sort of it's the same with Bond. He's experienced, but now he's got to be more forward thinking. He's got to do. He knows. The thing is that when you're at the beginning, when you start to do something, you just do stuff, try it out, and you don't know whether it's a mistake or not. Once you're experienced, you know when you've made a mistake, and you know that you've got to plan ahead to make sure those mistakes don't happen. And I think this is Fleming had certainly, I think, reached that stage in his career, and I think Bond had.
So we have him in one of the other things that he immediately sort of intuits when he's in Jamaica and he's dealing with the British consul and the sort of civil services. There's a sense of like half the, his own status as being somewhat uncomfortable for people, that he doesn't really fit in anywhere, and he finds an ally, but he's also someone that the local government would rather not have around.
Yeah, I think it's like this. It's politics, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what Bond is a man of action and reaction. He's not a politician, so he needs people on his side. He needs a team around him. Really, Quarrel can deal with a lot of things and does actually organise a few things, some decoys and contacts, etc. But Playdell Smith from the Colonial Office, he recognises that this is a guy who thinks the same as Bond, and so we know that he will help Bond and he will help smooth the way. He's somebody that you can trust. Whereas the acting governor knows that it's all down to, does the person want to do the job or are they looking out for themselves? Because those are the two sides of the politics. And he understands that the acting governor is looking out for himself. So it's a matter of Bond trying to present things in a way where the governor thinks that he'll come out well out.
Yeah, and that's not what Bond tends to, um, care so much about. It's not. I mean, after all, in Moonraker, he's kind of a nuclear bomb has gone off, and it's who knows what's going to happen with this kind of. So we have, as you said, the sort of rocky scene with Quarrel helping him train, and there's that very strange idea that. Um, he gets an insurance policy for Quarrel as it's like it's curiously forward looking, but at the same time also uh, incredibly morbid.
No, it's very practical because it's both of them are in essence acknowledging that this is not a holiday, that this is a life or death situation. Now remember that they have both already worked together in Live and Let Die, so that they understand, that the stakes can escalate pretty quickly. And Quarrel is already afraid of going to Crab Cave because he's had friends who he's never seen before. He's a fisherman. He's got fish friends. I don't think they'd be pushers. So if he's got tough friends who are afraid of Crab Key, he should be afraid too. So he's the insurance I think is very practical, and also Bond makes sure that it's a good amount as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of covers the cost of the family and everything, so they'll be okay should something happen, which of course, it does. Um, and so then we have this mission, which I think is is an exciting sort of.
Before we get there, I think we should mention that Dr. No or a another, we're not really sure, but in our heart of hearts, we know it's has tries to kill Bond several times. There's so he's being followed by a taxi, right, in order to know where he's staying. And they eventually to find out he's staying at the Blue Hills Hotel. He's then given a gift. They know he's a guest of King's House, which is the government. So some fruit is delivered to him, as it turns out, filled with cyanide, and which obviously he doesn't eat because he knows that his hotel room has been compromised because he's talcum powder down on his suitcase. And also then we have this centipede being dropped into his room and into his bed and crawling up his body, which I have to say is a really well written piece of work. And I think this is one of the things that Fleming gets really right, in that he's able to describe those intense moments really, really well, so that you are there, you actually feel these tiny, tiny feet crawling up his shin and then to the groin. I don't know what Bond has, what Fleming has about groins, but things always seem to be going there.
I think we all know what he has about. It's hardly a mystery, is it? It's like the a constant fear of castration.
And an impotence as well. The gun,
Precisely, yeah.
yeah, the gun not going off. Yeah. So the in as in From Russia with Love. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, Casino Royale. He's beaten around the testicles with
Yeah.
a carpet beater, and then spends a couple of chapters with trying to work out if the tackle still works.
Yeah. I mean, it's a theme, isn't it? It's a thread.
Mm. It's a trope, the kids would say.
Yeah. The kids. But yes, but this is but I mean it is a really I think a really well written few pages. And the thing I don't know about you, John, but were you as you were reading this, were you comparing it to the film at all?
It's funny because reading them so much and in such a short period of time, sort of one after the other, more or less, I find that the films have very much receded into the background because my imagination now is really dominated by the characters of the book. This one it is difficult because the film is quite close to the book in terms of story and incident and where the scenes happen and the camera girl and that sort of thing
Well, actually, I
are
think
all
it's
very
not.
close.
Well, actually,
Oh,
I
okay.
disagree with you on this because
Okay.
because
Okay.
because
Well, the centipede is a tarantula in the film,
yeah,
I
but it's
remember.
one of the few. If you think about the girl, the camera girl, Annabelle Chung, at the airport and at the at Pusfellas, called the Joy Boat in the novel, those scenes are very similar, right? And the tarantula scene, it's very similar, but there's no poison fruit. The taxi following the chauffeur in the film is not here, right? So the whole fight with the chauffeur doesn't happen. Felix Leiter is not in the film, is not in the book. So the whole idea of Felix Leiter and Quarrel, are they on goodies or baddies? That's completely. Miss Tarot is mentioned once in the novel, but never seen. And of course, in the uh, in the film, she's mentioned in the film, she is seen, right? And also Bond goes along to her place, and you have the whole car chase with the hearse, So all of that is not in the novel, right? So it's much more action orientated, the film. So really, I mean, I had a look, and Bond does not, he doesn't hit anybody, he doesn't carry out any action until page 130. Right, that is the first time he actually hits anybody or fires a gun. So this is more than a third through the book. He doesn't bed any women um, uh, in the film. Of course, you've got the casino scene, Sylvia Trent, Miss Tarot. That he goes to bed with. So the whole, if you like, the whole tone of the book is completely different. It's completely another character, as we were saying at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I stand corrected. One of us has written a book about the film recently, and one of us hasn't. So I think that is evident. Um, so let's move on to the island and I mean this is a daring nighttime mission similar to what we've already seen in Live and Let Die, where although in that case Bond was sort of flying solo, so to speak, or diving solo. Here we have a carefully thought out mission, which then is sort of sabotaged unwittingly by the arrival of the Venus from the sea Honeychild rider, it's kind of a striking character in this book, and to some degree, I think this would be another example of where the character of Bond is much more complicated than in the films, and much more kind of more passive, if you will.
I think he's very protective of Honey Rider, which he is in the film as well. I think that if you look at the moments between the two characters, he does take her at face value, and he understands that she has a hard background, not and he treats her with civility and kindness. He doesn't. If you, in contrast, in the film, in contrast to the previous women that he's been with or interacted with, so he takes that and acts very in like in the novel. He's very protective of her and is always trying to help her or guide her or make her feel less afraid. And in a way, I mean, at the very end, she sort of upends that whole idea. So he's actually, in a way, if we can jump forward just a little bit here. So the whole thing about Honey Rider is that she lives in a place not too far from where he was staying with Quarrel, but in like an old colonial mansion, fallen on hard times. She's been ill-used and abused, sadly, and but she's survived and she's educated, and also she has made friends with the animals. So she is like a wild child, a waif she's in I think early 20s, 20, somewhere around this age, but her if you like, emotional development would be younger. Bond recognizes, but she's one with the animals. So very at the end, there is Bond is being trying to be very protective towards her, etc. At the very very end, when he meets her after, spoiler alert, Dr. No dies, he says how much he was worrying about her being being eaten by crabs, and she sort of says, well, that's a silly notion. I know all about crabs. They're not at all like that. So in fact, her knowledge supersedes his knowledge. And in fact, so he was underestimating her in that sense. So it shows both the way that she has survived and her fault as a character in the novel. So I think that if you like, there's more of an openness between the two characters that you don't see Bond open up in the same way with other characters.
Yeah, I think as well. I mean, I think as well she's underestimated by Dr. No, who has these she's set up as this very naive character. She believes in the dragon, and Quarrel does too to some degree, but that is very quickly and very obviously turned around by Bond, and he's completely has no time for it really, and as a reader that's not going to be a problem. That's going to turn out right. But then in other regards, she is the superior. I think yeah. So we have this chase scene through the woods, and poor Quarrel gets dispatched in a kind of a terrible way. I mean, I'm always a bit surprised by how badly Quarrel dies in this, given that he's a recurring character, given that he's someone who's turned up in another book
Like
already,
Strangways.
and has already. Yes, exactly. Yeah, but Fleming does have this way of not minding killing people. I mean, he wanted to kill Leiter in Live and Let Die, and was sort of dissuaded from it by his American publisher in the end.
Yeah. It's sort of let's just lop off part of his body. you know, get bitten. Yeah, let bitten off. Somebody bites off more than they can chew. But it's I mean, not Fleming isn't precious with his characters, and that gives it.
That's a very good way of putting it.
So it gives, what it means is that if you know Strangways, who you saw in the previous one, dies at the beginning of this, you think, well, what's going to happen to Quarrel? Yeah, and it does. I mean, it's a horrible death for Quarrel. It's not dwelt on, which is good, but Bond then dwells on it afterwards. He wants to go back to cover his eyes and with sand. Yeah, Quarrel's dead body, burnt body, which is a sensitive notion, and a sign of respect for his friend.
And kind of
Yeah,
responsibility, you know, he definitely feels it, and yeah, that is something that actually sort of, you know, so to speak, sells the death, in the sense that that description of, or non-description, you don't get this sort of actual description of the body, you just get a description of James Bond looking at the
yeah,
body
and his
and
reaction to it.
looking at
Yeah,
it. Precisely, yeah,
and
yeah.
we get that because of this interior, not interior monologue, but Fleming allows us to understand what Bond is thinking and feeling at that moment. And they tried to do something similar in the film, where he goes when Bond is handcuffed, he then goes back to have a look at that quarrel, but he's not really given those grace moments in the films, which I think is a pity. And but also at the same time, I think that was one of the things later on in Connery's career as Bond. That was something that he wanted to introduce, to include more of, but the time and the format of the movies didn't allow.
It's interesting that at this point, where we're also sort of reduced, you know, we've had Bond with this sort of team that he has briefly, in terms of the consular guy, and then in terms of Quarrel, and then Honey Rider, and now he's back to being on his own with Honey Rider. Um, and we enter the layer that the chase is over. I do enjoy that chase, and them sort of, you know, the various sort of evasions that they put in, and you get a really good sense of the geography of where everything is happening. But then you have this sort of leap to a sort to a the surreal Fleming, you know, the Fleming of that I think would influence a great deal things like The Prisoner and the Avengers, and that, you know, that they're kind of recognizable. And I mean, I think there's an element where we think of these things as a bit separate, that, you know, that the 1960s run wild with the secret agent idea in Austin Powers like directions. But reading this, I mean, that the hotel where everybody's really nice to you as if you're guests at a hotel, but you're even really prisoners, the mink-lined hotel is
Mink-lined Prison, it's called the chapter, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's just really I was talking to another guest about an earlier episode. We were talking about the chapter headings could be from J.G. Ballard, could be the title of J.G. Ballard novels. You know, the mink-lined prison would work perfectly
Amidst
in
the
that
alien
context.
cane.
That sort of surrealness suddenly arrives with the Leia, and with Julius No, Doctor No.
Yeah, and we spend, what is it, 3 chapters just with them talking. So we have it's
Yeah.
just 1, 2, 3, and it's just like it's crazy that you would have a novel, right, and you spend what, 80, 90 pages, just talking,
Yeah.
and it's essentially, Doctor No basically has nobody to talk to. He's a lonely old Chinese with no hands, contact lens, and all these gadgets, devices, and all this power. But he's not got nobody on his own level, or with enough intelligence to understand what he's talking about, because he's among
Mm.
apes. This is, and that's the excuse for him to spill his guts and tell his ideas, his life story, his master plan.
what the Invincibles would call monologuing.
monologuing. Yeah, but also, but this is, isn't it always the same? This is, you know, in book in everybody. Every he's just Fleming is following the format, but he's just making it a bit more. It's almost as if he's trying to see how far he can get away with it. Don't you think? I
Mm,
mean, I mean that
mm.
it does have that sort of element. Okay, so German father, Chinese wife, mother, um, brought up by the Tongs, in America, steals money, has his both hands lopped off for stealing it, even though he wouldn't give them where the money was. Then escapes, buys the island with the stolen money, and yeah, escapes because they shoot him in the heart, but his heart's in a different place. I mean, it's just like, for goodness sake, it's almost as if Fleming is writing this and saying, all right, he gets shot in the heart. All right, so he gets shot in the heart. What's a way of having him, you know, why would he, how could he survive if he got shot in the, oh, I know, we'll move the heart. Oh, let me research that. Do people actually have hearts on the other side of their, on the right, their bodies? You know, you can almost hear,
The ambidextrous heart.
yeah, it's like, there's the heart. You know, when the fetus grows, do some grow on the other side? And you can almost hear him thinking, right, I need to buy a first edition of this book in order to find out, to do my research. Um, and that's the way it feels, as though he's constantly putting all these ridiculous hurdles in front of himself and then trying to solve them, you know, as some sort of complex puzzle, for himself, in order to keep himself interested and on his toes. Yeah, I mean,
And it does go very close to sort of pastiche. I mean,
oh
it
no,
really pushes the
no,
ridiculous to
it
the
is
to the.
ridiculous. Come on, John. You've got to admit, there's and at every point in this, you know, I was thinking of Fu Manchu.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
sort of, come on, but
Sort of good. Well, I mean, look, just to skip forward for a sec as well. You know, he the way he kills him is by drowning him in bird shit. You know, I mean, there's no sort of villainous fight, and
yeah, he's
it,
on the.
it's a really pathetic end.
Let's face it, he's on the phone at the same time. He's on the phone to the people, presumably with the conveyor belt, operating the conveyor belt. He has his back to the end of the conveyor and operated by a crane, which Bond has killed the operator, taken over the crane. And the end of it is all this guano, tons and tons of it coming down. Was loading a ship, but now being offloaded onto Doctor No. I mean, the whole setup. Do you realise how many pages of this novel are set up about the operational procedures of guano? You know, we have we have we have not only how it is produced by the cormorants going down, dipping down, eating the anchovies, is it, or silverfish, whatever, right? And then one, you know, for every, you know, kilogram of fish, there's 1 gram of guano produced, which they deposit on the top of this mountain. And then he has 50 men or 100 men and women taking off so many kilos of this every day, of this guano, which has been there for hundreds of years. And then we also get details on the business practices of guano, of the history of the guano trade that was set up in South America, was where it was mostly used. But this is the northernmost point at which the guano, you know, and it wasn't profitable. But Doctor No reinvigorated the works, and he came back, and he like, right, all of this. Now I'm like, there must be a couple of thousand words just on guano, right?
Yeah.
All of this for the punchline that I'm sure he started with, you know, Doctor No. What's the most ridiculous way I can get in guano? Yeah, and, you know, drowned in guano, and then he worked backwards from that, filling in.
Oh my
Yeah,
word. Oh my word. I mean, that's a
that
lot
is,
of guano. That's a lot of bird shit to be
but
frank.
you know where he Fleming got this. He went.
Well, he went on a
Yeah, yeah,
trip,
yeah,
didn't
with
he?
Ivor
He
Bryce.
was
So March 15th, 1956. He looks like he did all his research in 56, or most of it, as you would expect, after he'd finished From Russia with Love. So March 15th, he goes with Ivor Bryce, Arthur Verney, the Flamingo Protection Society, and Robert Murphy of the American Natural History Museum. And they fly to Inagua, which is this remote island, 400 miles from anywhere else, in a small Cessna plane, in order to count flamingos, the flamingo population. And it's here that he gets um, they have to travel because it's exactly as described, with the mangroves, the white clay, and the swamp. And the only way of getting around is either by on a canoe, wading through it, or in a swamp buggy. Yeah. So all of
mm,
this information, he Fleming gathered from that trip. I think there was also guano, if I remember correctly. I read it a long time ago. But he did a whole series of articles traveling, all about diving, cave, even squid is on one of them as well. He did a whole article on squid. So this is all part of his training, both as a reporter, in order so that he could apply all this information into the novel. He said, being basically a reporter by trade, said Fleming, I have a good, strong visual sense for background and intense and interesting detail, which I try to bring into the books. So really, he's constantly trying to bring that research, even in Dr. No's. So whenever you see anybody quote anything, or you see a phrase that's slightly different in a Fleming novel, that's because he's taken it from some. So I remember at one point, what does Dr. No say? He says, I'm just looking at my notes here. He says, "Give me a fulcrum and I will move the world." Right? That's Archimedes. That's a quote from Archimedes. And there's another one where he says, Clausewitz's first principle, have a secure base. He's always quoting from all these different sources, in order to give not only a sense of the knowledge that Bond had or that Fleming had, but also that, in this case, Dr. No has, or the different characters.
right, absolutely. And yeah, it's how do you write a
Yeah, yeah,
genius? You go to your bookshelves and you pull out as many books as you
yeah,
possibly can because that the effortless act of the quotation is always
yeah.
impressive. So we've sort of come to the end of the book, except for the fact that we have Bond going through this obstacle course, which is again pushing the boundaries of pastiche in the sort of like, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to do something elaborate which might not kill you, but it's worse than
Yeah.
killing you, sort
Uh,
of ending.
which he sets
Um,
up as being a way to, um, in order to scientifically, as the Germans did during World War II, to scientifically establish, his father's heritage, the father who disowned him. He's only doing it because he wants some sort of kudos from his father. He wants his father to acknowledge what a good boy he is. In order to do an experiment on Bond, in order to find the limits of pain and endurance, before the final coup de grace.
which is kind of what we want as well. I mean, I think there's someone, Paul Johnson in the New Statesman, said of this book, it's sexy, snobbish sadism, and
Yeah, but he copied that from previous people who had used it, and he was using it. He was using it in a pejorative way against Fleming. But if you actually have a look at the book, if you actually look at how much sex is there actually in the book, well, no, there's none in terms of the actual sexual act. There's none that happens in the book at all. There are longings between Bond and Honey, obviously, um, but there is actual none. Snobbishm, yeah, there is. Some of it is snobbish in terms of the colonial aspect of it. Bond does
mm,
comment on the amenities in the main-lined prison. The Guerlain, and there was where they actually names some of the toiletries. Sadism, Yeah, I have to say there's a lot of sadism. Can't deny that.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely yeah, guilty as charged. So we have the honey child. We've already talked about sort of cutting out the reversing the roles somewhat with her knowledge of local things, and then at the very end there's the reverse. You owe me slave time, which yeah, you mentioned there hasn't been much sex in the novel, so that feels like a fitting moment to but again, it's sort of like the reversal of what you would expect from the films, which is it's her being like, "I want some sex now," and Bond sort of saying, "Oh well, I think," and she's like, "No, shut up. I'm in
Yeah,
charge now."
and also he's a wounded animal. I mean, the I mean he suffered a lot to such a degree that the doctors say that he should really stay in hospital. With burns and cuts, etc. As Bond says himself during the endurance, where they have tarantulas, they have in the pipe, they have heat, burning heat. Um, all of these things that he conquers through his resourcefulness. He steals a knife, a blunt knife, which he sharpens before he gets in the pipe. He steals a lighter, which he can use to see what's happening in the pipe. The mesh, the wire mesh at the beginning of the pipe, at the entrance, he then breaks down and reconfigures in order to make a prong or a javelin or spear. Um, and all of these are used all the way through his endurance. But he gets cut, he gets burned. But the internal monologue says these are just external. It's what him inside him, which is the courage which James Maloney talks about at the beginning of the novel. It's that internal thing, the grit or the urge to continue, to carry on, to carry out his job and his duty, his mission. That's the thing which is important. And so yeah, so I think that was the key point of that whole scene. Not the sadism as such, but the fact that he is being physically challenged. And of course, the end of that scene, we should say, he ends up falling out of this pipe, 40 feet or 100 feet into the sea, where awaits a giant squid. And I mean, the absurdity of that whole thing of being at the end, he's going to be fed to squid, is just like the kraken, because it has been set up that this island, this side of the island, is goes into the Cuba Deep, which is incredibly deep. If you have a look on the map, a deep crevice into the earth, under sea. For which I think even now they've never been able to find the bottom of. And so this is the excuse that this kraken, this giant 50 foot squid, I think, is it come from these depths, being captured by Dr. No in this place so that he could eat eat his experiments. I can't believe that Fleming actually did that. I mean, it is so ridiculous. But I mean, it's fun to read.
Absolutely, and again, it speaks to that sort of the element of feverish dream that goes along with this, and it's also interesting, I think, reading all the books of how, in terms of he's using the spy novel, but really they're almost reading like science fiction adventures. There's no, he spends more time fighting, marvelous things like sharks and octopuses than he does sort of the KGB or the Smersh. I mean, even when he fights the Russians, he fights this extraordinary organization which most people have never heard of, and which operates in a very elaborate fashion. There's no realpolitik in here. There's very little. I mean, I get the feeling that he never goes to Russia, or he very rarely goes anywhere near the Eastern Bloc, just because it's too drab and there's not enough good food.
I think the culinary delights of various other countries, but he did do thrilling adventures, didn't he? He went to quite a few countries for
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think also perhaps he was aware of other writers using material. You think of John le Carre would have been later, I think, in the 60s, but I think that perhaps he was aware that if he made it too real, the real world may catch up with him. The whole idea of the character, I think he realized. I think this is one of the peculiarities of James Bond in that he is a wish fulfillment character. But at a certain point, and I think this is the point, this is the turning point. At a certain point, the character becomes too real. The character becomes more real than the adventures and the location and the people he meets.
See, esatto. Yes, it's. Sorry, I was answering Italian then. I was thinking in Italian as I was. Yeah. Yeah, how do you feel Dr. No fits with in the Fleming, in the whole of the series of novels? I mean, where for you does it rank
Oh, I
particularly?
don't do ranks.
You
I
seem to.
don't do ranks. I don't
Okay,
do.
okay, okay,
It's what do you call it? I think that for me, its importance is that it's one of a series of novels, and I think that what it does points to the future of Bond, to where Fleming is going to take. Whether Fleming knew it or not, there is something about the character of Bond in this, his vulnerability, that I think Fleming probably recognized that that is something that he should capitalize, and which he did in future novels.
yeah, absolutely, and of course, with the films, we've also had, we've also had that element, come to the forefront more recently,
Yeah, but it was. By the way, we haven't mentioned the MacGuffin.
which is the tilting of the missiles. Yeah, but it doesn't really operate like a MacGuffin because that's not what his. I mean, the mission is finding out what happened to Strangways and why it happened to him. It's and he there's a certain point at which he says, "Okay, mission accomplished. I know it's murder. I know there's something going on this island. I could just go home and phone the Marines." The tilting comes in as a sort of like I don't know, as something to give it, I guess, a little bit more glamour than this all about being about a remarkably possessive trader in.
Yeah, it is. It's just put in like, but nothing happens with it. It's just like, oh, and the real reason I'm doing this is because, yeah,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
we have no, Bond doesn't try to stop it. We don't see any operation.
Or nobody's complained about it. Nobody's even noticed that it's happening. As far as they're concerned, it's just they're inaccurate. They're not. They're just being incompetent and not working.
And that's based on a real thing. So
No, I
yeah,
didn't
there
know
was
that.
December 5th, 1956, Snark missile. The names of the missiles are based on the names of real missiles that he mentions. The
Okay.
Snark missile veered off course and did not respond to corrective flight instructions or the self-destruct instructions. It had enough fuel to reach Brazil and has never
Oops.
been found. So, right,
Oops.
and
Double
this was
oops.
reported in the press December 5th or 6th, 19. So this is again within Fleming's period of research. So he would have collected
Mm,
this sort of these sort of notes, just like in the previous summer. That's when he wrote the James Bond Secret Agent, which was
mm.
a 16-page script for a 30-minute TV pilot, which featured Doctor No, not the same Doctor version. But that didn't happen.
Right.
So
Right.
he felt quite comfortable to reuse the name and some of the elements. Um, so yeah, I think that what we see is that Fleming was a bit of a magpie with information.
And rightly so. You can't plagiarize from yourself. It's as long as long as you have your resources and you you keep them close to your chest. If they're not been used for something, you can recycle them as and profit from them as just so much guano that's collected on a mountaintop. Lest you drown in it, Paul. Lest you drown in it. Listen, it's been fantastic talking to you, Paul. You've got it's such always learning stuff. You've got such a broader, deeper knowledge than I have, and it's great to tap into your insights. So thank you so much for
It's
joining
been
me.
a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed rereading it. It's always enjoyable going back after a period of time to revisit things that you looked at before, because you always see something new,